But without further ado, I'm going to introduce to you our speaker for this and many of our weeks, Gary Gisselman, who is going to be talking about grant school. Take it away.
Thank you, Ben, and welcome this afternoon to this final episode of Preservation Month. May has always been designated as Preservation Month, and this month we took a look at some buildings in Wausau to highlight the work of preservation or sometimes the lack of preservation. But this week we talk about Grant School, perhaps the more recent episode with regard to how preservation works in this city, at least part of the story about preservation, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But first, a little bit of let's talk a little bit about Grant School. It's on the northwest side of Wausau, up off of Bridge Street. As you cross Bridge Street going west, there it is. But in an early map of Wausau, there really wasn't much north of Bridge Street. You can see that was sort of on the edge of town, really, when they put this up in around 1910. Not much there, but the Wausau is continuing to grow. So, but the grant school we're talking about today was not the first grant school. There was an earlier grant school built on First Avenue, and I think a little bit further, most likely on Maple, somewhere along the south of Bridge Street, also an earlier grant school. And I just wanted to point out that, because if you're thinking about the history of grant school in this community, you really have to talk about that earlier grant school that the city built up on First Avenue. So this building on the corner of Oak and 4th Avenue, built. This is an original footprint of the building, and specifically noticed on the bottom part, that bay area that sticks out. We'll be talking a little bit about that as we go on. But this is the original footprint of Grant School on the corner of Oak and 4th. Notice that it's not sitting perpendicular to either one, but it's sort of sitting there on the corner. So which gives it a unique perspective with regard to Oak and 4th Avenue. But let's begin with the architects of Henry Van Ryn and Garrett DeGalke, two architects that coming from Milwaukee, key players in this city. They were not unknown to our city. The city engaged them for Franklin School, an early school on Bridge Street on the east side of Wausau. Also the Washington School on the corner of Jefferson and 5th Street, and then also the Lincoln School on 5th Avenue. So all these buildings have been torn down, but they are true representatives of early architecture and school architecture in the city, which gives further importance to the history of Grant School. All these were built by, again, Van Ryn and DeGalke, noted architects in Wisconsin, as well, of course, here in Wausau. So a little bit of a history of Grant School itself. I won't spend too much time on this, but in 1908, the land purchased, then eventually the school opens. It was at one time called also the Sixth Ward School. So in the early days, they called some of the schools by the ward that they were living in, so to speak. But in 1912, it was officially changed to Grant School. In 1933, the first notable historic event at Grant School was the first stunt night, and then eventually in 1964, additional programs of the school district for the visually impaired came to Grant School. So Grant School, named after President Grant, which would have been the 18th president of the United States, coming after Abraham Lincoln and Andrew Johnson, and then eventually President Grant. a noted Civil War general, as well as a very noted president of the United States. So here we have Grant School built. A little article in 1914 in the paper says that this, in the midst of a grove of majestic pines, the Grant School, the newest and most beautiful of the Wausau public school buildings, stands out as an architectural gem. It is located at the end of North 4th Avenue at the edge of the city and at present is occupied by classes only up to the 7th grade. So again, early outskirts of the city, but eventually that city would certainly grow up around Grant School. And then another noted feature with regard to Grant School was that at one time in 1929, when the recreation department of the city, well, let's have a skating rink at Grant School. And of course, the whole history of skating, of hockey in the city is very well known. And Grant School was the recipient of an early endeavor by the city to have a rink at Grant School. And of course, that would last for many, many years at Grant School. So let's bring us up a little bit to the current time. Back in 2017 and 2018, August of 2018, there was a report commissioned by the Wausau Historic Preservation Commission with regard to an historical and architectural resource survey of the city of Wausau. So what this survey was, an in-depth review of a lot of buildings in this city with regard to eligibility or not eligible for the National Register of Historic Places. I won't go into that. We've talked a little bit about that. I won't go into that criteria at this point in time, much less I want to give noted to what this survey said about Grant School. I think because this leads us into a little bit about what has been going on the last couple of years in the preservation effort. So this is the report on Grant School, 500 North 4th Avenue. And then the report went on reflecting a modest classical revival influence. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the things, the noted architecture of this building in a couple of minutes. But went on to say, it's talking by a little bit of a history of the Milwaukee firm of Van Ryn and DeGalke, and then it goes on to talk a little bit about the history. But the bottom part says that retaining a good degree of integrity, the former 6th Ward School, later Grant School, is recommended as potentially eligible for the National Register under a couple of criterion: history, education, and under criterion C, architecture. Both the history and the architecture of this place is very well noted, and it does give credence to the fact that this could be on the National Register of Historic Places. It is certainly eligible. So let's take a look at Grant School. Here it sits on this corner, very hidden by those trees. That article made note of those trees. Well, it is somewhat still hidden. But it's still here. A great school on this corner. So this is one of the noted architectural features that was made mention was the intact doors and the stone surrounds. This is the main entrance to the school. Many architectural features which we'll come back to, but this is the south exterior part. I'm sorry, this is the northern door, still the same intact door surrounds. This is the south door, still the same stone surrounds. So really, intact, still retaining that same flavor of when the school was built in 1910. Again, returning to the front, take a look at some of the ornamentation. the dentals, the ornamentation on top of the building, quite unique. It has served this architectural feature for many years and is still intact. The very noted dentals here above the roof line, I should say, along the roof line of the building. And then if we take another look, you can see quickly this bay that is on the northern part of the building, still intact, built for the kindergarten back in 1910, one of the early kindergartens in this city. And this is a unique feature, really, of this building, this bay. If you remember the original footprint of this was one of the true distinguished architectural features of Grant School, and we still have it today intact. But so then let us come up a little closer. So then I want to talk a little bit about what has gone on within the last year. Now I want to place this in the context that if you're seeing this in 5 years from now, just remember that at this point in time we were going through a pandemic, and which did limit access to a lot of meetings, and that a lot of meetings were done with video, but that was the context of a lot of these meetings that was going on with the school board, as well as with the Landmark Commission, as well as with the Wausau City Council. So we begin in August of 2020, when the school board, and their minutes here agendize the school board, and we can see that their resolve that the construction of an elementary school on the Grant Elementary building, improvements, construction of an elementary school on the Grant Elementary site to merge Grant and Lincoln schools, and removal of the current building. So basically the referendum as presented to the city in November of 2020 was for the removal of Grant School and to building a new combined Lincoln and Grant School. So with that, two organizations within the city stepped up. One was the Wausau Historic Preservation Commission, that was very influential, and we'll talk a little bit about them. And then also the Friends of Wausau Historic Landmarks. Let me go just back a little bit. Give Christine Martin, president of the Friends of Wausau Historic Landmarks, and Linda Tresek, who was chair of the Wausau Historic Preservation Commission, were very involved with presenting to the community, as well as to the Wausau City Council, the case for the preservation of Grant School. The Friends of Wausau Historic Landmarks, Christine Martins, presented this architectural and historic significance of Grant Elementary. This is a whole packet, and if you're seeing this in the future, this will be a part of the historical record of Grant School here at the Historical Society, a very detailed timeline, the importance of what the architecture and historic significance of Grant School has meant, and this packet will be at the Historical Society. But this packet of information was presented to both the Wausau School Board as well as the Wausau City Council. And eventually, the Historic Preservation Commission, I don't mean to get too in-depth here, but I just want to point out that the Historic Preservation Commission met very soon, August 20th, soon after that meeting of the school board, and took action. One action was to present to the Wausau City Council a resolution, and you can see that the resolution was resolved that the Wausau Common Council of the City of Wausau supports the preservation of the original school building at 500 North 4th Avenue and opposes any plan to demolish the building. And it be further resolved that the city encourages the Wausau School District to incorporate the historic building into their planned facility upgrades or to seek reuse options for the building. So this was eventually presented to the Wausau City Council and it passed. This is just their agenda a month later for the City Council. It was presented to the City Council, and this is just a little bit of a timeline of what the Friends of Wausau Historic Landmarks, as well as the City of Wausau Historic Preservation Commission did. The referendum was November 20th. The Wausau Historic Preservation Commission resolution to the City Council on September 22nd, that resolution passed the City Council. And then also, the Preservation Commission decided to proceed with the landmarking of Grant School as a City of Wausau Historic Landmark in November 19th, which was after but they still went into process of landmarking Grant School. Public hearing held November 19th, 2020 by the Plan Commission, and eventually the Wausau City Council adopted that resolution to landmark Grant School as a landmark in the city of Wausau. So that is briefly a little bit of their story. The referendum failed. There were a variety of other reasons, neighborhood issues with regard to the referendum, a lot of other issues with regard to the referendum failing. But I believe that there was some effort, and we acknowledge the effort of the Wausau Historic Preservation Commission and the Friends of Wausau Historic Landmarks in presenting to the people, to the citizens, the case for saving Grant School. And as a result of the failure of the referendum, the Grant School was saved, and the school board took notice of that and incorporated other plans into the future of Grant School. So today, Grant School is still there. Take a look, walk around it. It's a great building. It's now on the list of Wausau Historic Landmarks. A great building, a great history, a great architectural gem, really, of the city. So with that, hope you enjoyed that. Take a look at that building. It's a great building, and we look forward to the future use of Grant School for many, many years. So I'll turn it back to Ben, and he'll see if we have comments or questions. But I hope you enjoyed that. It's just a little bit of what I really wanted to emphasize was the public involvement in gearing up so that people could see the great architectural and historical nature of Grant School. Thank you, Ben.
Yeah, great job, Gary. I think we should say, for the interest of full disclosure, obviously we have been sponsored by the Friends of the Historic Landmark Commission for this program, and Gary is, we're obviously a little it's a cause that is very much in line with what we would try to do as well, as preserving history. So not to say that we didn't tell all a biased story or anything like that, but just for the sake of I should point that out. But yeah, if you have any questions, let's see. Yeah, Rebecca Kell said that she was glad that you didn't show any pics of the building from the 70s and 80s when it was painted pink. I don't know if you have any.
We do have those pictures, but I thought it's best to incorporate what I think the school board decided at one point in time to take that, and go back to the original brick, which I think was a great thing.
Yeah. I guess I had a question that might be worth at least touching on here, since this is the last week of the presentation. I noticed as you were showing pictures of the building, and I realized, oh, I was doing the same thing in what I did in the last couple of weeks. When we talk about historic preservation, we usually talk about the outside of a building, right? We don't really get into the nitty gritty of what's on the inside. And I think part of that is obviously because of logistical reasons. It's in the middle of a pandemic. You can't go to the inside of the grant school to take pictures if that was something. But it does seem to be a thing that, in general, when we talk about the historic, the integrity of a building, it often refers to the outside. Do you want to? I don't know if you want to.
Well, I think that's right. The Even on the national level, the National Preservation Plan, the National Register, pretty much speaks to exterior of buildings. I think that that's really the core of what the preservation movement means. I think it's hard to move into the interior, especially with houses nowadays. People want to redo maybe their kitchen, it's hard, I think, to categorize or to move into the interior of buildings. Sometimes the interior of buildings do present an important part of that building. For instance, the federal building, the mural by Garrett Sinclair, a key part of that building, as well as the courtroom on the second floor. So sometimes we do move into interior parts of the building, but usually it's the exterior, that part that's presents itself to the public. That's the core, really the main areas of what we look at for criteria. Does that help?
No, yeah, I think that makes sense. I thought, if anybody was wondering that as we've been doing these presentations last month, like maybe something that we could touch on, because I think that that's helpful. But yeah. Oh, she followed up and said that the paint was, she thinks, was moved around 1992 when they tuck pointed the whole exterior as well. Sometimes that happens. Yeah.
Well, and more stories with regard to the renovation of Grant School through 110 years. Of course, a lot of different things have been dealt. I think there's a gym on the backside and a variety of other renovations that have taken place. But I was like the preservation movement, like we just talked about. It's pretty much the exterior of the of the building that presents itself to the public that we're mostly concerned about.
Yeah. And then I guess finally here, I just as a comment, on YouTube, someone says that they remember the summer enrichment programs at the grade school level at Grant School. So I think, and you touched upon this, with other things. It's not just the education. Okay, the school day, it's in the building. It's also a bigger part of the community as well, whether that's the enrichment programs or the ice skating rink or sort of thing. Yeah, that's cool. Okay, well, I think maybe we'll call it there. But before we go, this is the end of one month, so I'm sure you're all wondering, what are we doing next month? Well, next week we're going to be starting June Dairy Month. That's the month. June is Dairy Month in here. So, and of course, dairy is a big part of our collective history in Marathon County. So, this is the plan. So I'll be doing the next week the county agricultural school and the extension programs, and then from there Gary will be kind of covering the rest of the month. We're working on an exhibit that we kind of have to finish up, so I'm going to be a little occupied, and graciously Gary has stepped in to kind of fill the rest of the month. So, but yeah, a lot of great stuff that we're going to be talking about. If you're interested in dairy, or even if dairy's not your, as someone who has a life-threatening food allergy to milk and eggs, dairy isn't necessarily my go-to, but there's a lot of really cool stuff here, especially talking about local Marathon County history. So we hope you will join us for these, like all of our history chats, starting every Thursday at 12:30. You can always check the video recordings after the fact if you can't join us live. But we do enjoy seeing people come out live, and it's great that you guys have setting aside your time to come and have some history with us. So thank you very much for that, and we hope to see you next time. So yeah.